"Please don't take my clothes away." The Apache Plea and the cowboys' response shocked. The sun was just beginning to rise over the endless stretches of dusty land in the American Southwest. The sky was painted with soft streaks of orange and pink, and the heat of the day had not yet arrived. In this harsh, wide-open desert, life was never easy, especially for those who had nowhere to hide from the burning sun or the cold nights. Among the rocky hills and scattered cacti, a small group of Apache people moved cautiously, their eyes alert to every sound, every movement. They were survivors, skilled in understanding the land and knowing its secrets, but even the wisest could feel fear in the vast openness where danger often came without warning. Among them was a young Apache girl, no more than 12 years old, with dark eyes that shone with both curiosity and wariness. She was carrying a small bundle of belongings tied carefully in a piece of cloth. Her hair was tangled from traveling through the scrubby land, and her feet were bare, hardened by walking over stones and sand. She was small and fragile-looking, but anyone who knew her would see that her spirit was strong. She had learned from a very young age that life could be cruel, and the world outside her small family circle was full of people who did not understand her or her people. As she walked a little ahead of the others, she noticed a distant figure approaching on horseback. At first, she thought it might be a hunter or perhaps a scout from another group of Apache. But as the figure drew closer, she realized it was not someone from her own world. The rider was dressed in clothing she had never seen before, stiff fabric, a wide-brimmed hat, and boots that gleamed strangely in the early sunlight. The man on the horse moved confidently, looking around with sharp eyes, as if he was used to seeing things that others might miss. Fear shot through the girl's body. She had heard stories from elders about men like him, cowboys who traveled the land, often careless of the lives of others, taking what they wanted without thought. She tightened her grip on her bundle and instinctively stepped behind a large rock for cover. Her small heart pounded in her chest as she whispered a warning to herself. "Stay quiet, don't let him see you." But the man's horse slowed as he came closer, sensing movement in the bushes and rocks. The cowboy dismounted, the leather of his boots crunching on the gravel, and he looked directly toward the girl. His dark eyes met hers, and for a moment there was silence. The desert wind moved between them, carrying dust and the faint smell of dry earth. The girl's mind raced. She knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to keep herself safe. Trembling, she stepped out from behind the rock, hoping her presence would not provoke him. Her voice was small but clear as she cried, "Please don't take my clothes away." The words startled the cowboy. He had expected fear, yes, but not this particular plea. It was unusual, almost shocking, and it caught him completely off guard. He paused, unsure how to respond. He had seen many things in his life on the frontier: hardship, suffering, and danger. But the desperate plea of a young girl, spoken with both fear and dignity, was not something he had encountered before. He could feel the weight of her words, the vulnerability behind them, and it forced him to stop and consider his actions in a way he had not done for a long time. The girl's fear was genuine, not just for herself, but for the small family group she had been traveling with. Her plea carried the meaning of something deeper than just clothing. It was a request for respect, for safety, and for her dignity to remain intact. In her world, clothes were more than fabric. They were a shield, a sign of identity, and a piece of one's spirit. For her to ask someone not to take them away was like asking for her life and soul to be honored. The cowboy, who had seen the harshness of life on the frontier, began to reflect. He thought about his own experiences, the long days under the sun, the nights spent cold and alone, and the difficult choices he had made to survive. He remembered moments when he had acted quickly, sometimes harshly, to get what he needed or to protect himself. Yet now, faced with this tiny human being standing before him with such courage, he felt a strange mix of emotions: compassion, surprise, and even shame for what he might have done if he had not paused. He looked at her more carefully. She was small, yes, but her eyes were bright and alert, filled with intelligence and a natural awareness of the world around her. She was aware of the danger she faced, yet she stood her ground, holding onto her bundle tightly, showing more bravery than he had expected from someone so young. Her voice, though trembling, carried the strength of someone who knew that the world could be cruel, but also knew that she must survive it with her spirit intact. The cowboy took a slow breath, the kind that comes when a man is about to make a choice that could define him. He realized that the girl's plea was more than a request. It was a test of his character. In that moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath along with him. He could see the endless hills stretching into the distance, the sparse vegetation, the harsh sun, and the unforgiving terrain. And he understood that survival here depended not only on strength, but on judgment, restraint, and sometimes mercy. The girl watched him carefully, her own fear mingled with a faint curiosity. She could sense that he was thinking, deciding, and she held her breath. In her young life, she had learned to read people quickly, to see when someone was dangerous and when someone might be trusted. There was a long pause, but neither moved, each measuring the other across the space of the desert floor. Finally, the cowboy spoke, his voice calm but steady, as if he had made a decision that mattered more than anything else at that moment. "I won't take anything from you," he said. "You're safe here." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight that the girl could feel in her chest. Relief washed over her like a cool river in the desert heat. For the first time since seeing him, she relaxed slightly, letting go of the tight grip on her bundle. The desert wind shifted, moving sand around their feet, and the world seemed to return to its natural rhythm. The cowboy extended a hand, not to take, but as a gesture of peace. The girl hesitated for a moment, then, understanding his intentions, nodded slightly in acknowledgement. She realized that not all people were the same, that some could surprise you with kindness even in a world full of danger. In that early morning light, the cowboy and the young Apache girl remained for a while in quiet understanding. No words were needed beyond the ones already spoken. The tension of the moment had passed, leaving in its place a fragile trust, the first thread in a connection that neither fully understood yet. Around them, the desert stretched on, vast and indifferent, but between these two humans, something had shifted. A recognition that empathy could exist even in the harshest of places, and that courage sometimes came from those who seemed the weakest. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain, the cowboy prepared to mount his horse again. He gave the girl a small nod of respect, and she returned it, understanding that this encounter would be remembered for a long time, perhaps even shaping the choices they would both make in the days to come. The wind carried the faint sound of movement as the Apache family continued on their journey, and the cowboy watched for a moment before riding off into the distance, each aware that the other had left a mark on their heart. The morning continued, but neither would forget the plea that had broken through the silence of the desert, nor the unexpected response that had shown a different way to act in a world often ruled by fear. It was a beginning, the first step in a story that would test morals, courage, and understanding, and it all began with a single desperate voice saying, "Please don't take my clothes away." The cowboy rode slowly along the edge of the desert, his horse's hooves kicking up clouds of dust with each step. The image of the young Apache girl lingered in his mind. Her plea, simple yet full of fear and dignity, seemed to echo in his thoughts, repeating over and over, "Please, don't take my clothes away." He had heard many cries for help in his life, many desperate words, but none had struck him with the weight that this child's voice carried. It was not just the fear in her tone, it was the courage behind it. He thought about the frontier life he had lived for so long. Years spent navigating the harsh deserts, the lonely nights under the stars, the constant struggle for survival had taught him to move quickly, to act without hesitation, and sometimes to take what he needed without thinking of others. That kind of life left little room for mercy or compassion, yet here, in the silence of the desert, he realized that he had overlooked something essential: humanity. The young girl had reminded him that strength was not only measured in survival, but also in the choices a person made when faced with another's vulnerability. As he rode, he remembered his early years as a boy growing up near a small town. He had watched neighbors and strangers alike chase what they wanted without concern for those they might hurt. He had learned to protect himself, to be clever, and sometimes to act harshly if needed. Yet deep inside, a small voice had always told him that there was another way, one that required patience, respect, and understanding. Seeing the girl standing firm despite her fear, he realized that this voice had been speaking to him all along, and now it demanded action. The cowboy dismounted near a shaded area, resting his horse and letting it graze while he considered his next steps. He knew the girl and her people were not just wandering aimlessly. They were trying to survive, moving carefully through a land that had been harsh and unforgiving for generations. Her plea was a reflection of that struggle, a combination of fear, trust, and hope. He wondered what life must have been like for her, growing up under the constant watch of danger, learning at a young age to read the expressions of strangers and predict their intentions. He thought about the Apache people he had met before. They were known for their resilience, their intelligence, and their deep connection to the land. But he also knew that misunderstandings between settlers and Apache were common and often led to unnecessary conflict. Fear and prejudice could turn small misunderstandings into tragedy. And now, faced with this one child's plea, he realized he had a choice. He could either see her as just another obstacle in the wild frontier or recognize her as a human being, deserving of dignity and protection. The cowboy let out a slow sigh, running a hand over his weathered face. He knew that decisions made in moments like this could define a person for the rest of their life. He could have ignored her, or worse, acted in a way that would harm her. But something in him, the part that had always questioned the cruelty of the world, urged him to act differently. He wanted to honor the courage she had shown, the fear she had overcome to speak her truth. He wanted to show that even in a world filled with danger, there could still be room for compassion. Meanwhile, the young Apache girl was not far away. She had returned to her group after their brief encounter, but her mind was racing with questions. Who was that man? Why had he listened to her plea instead of taking advantage of her fear? Could there be people in the world who would respect her dignity, even when given the opportunity not to? These thoughts filled her with a mixture of caution and hope. She knew the world was unpredictable, and trust was not easily given, but the memory of his calm voice and steady gaze lingered, giving her a strange sense of reassurance. The cowboy, after a long pause, decided to follow a parallel path near the Apache group, careful to maintain a respectful distance. He wanted to ensure their safety without intruding or causing alarm. As he observed them, he noticed the careful ways in which they moved, the attention to their surroundings, the quiet communication between members, and the unspoken bond that tied them together. It struck him how different their lives were from his own. While he had grown up in towns and trading posts, learning to rely on deals and rules, these people relied on intuition, skill, and a deep connection to the land. For hours, the cowboy watched quietly. He noticed the way the young girl led the youngest children of the group, making sure they did not stray into danger. She carried herself with a seriousness beyond her years, and he could see the pride her family must have had in her resilience. He thought about his own childhood and how often he had taken safety and guidance for granted. Seeing her in action, he realized that bravery came in many forms, and sometimes the smallest, quietest individuals showed the greatest courage. As the day progressed, the cowboy began to reflect on the larger lessons the encounter had taught him. Life on the frontier was filled with choices, some easy, some difficult. He had always prided himself on making smart decisions, but he realized that morality and compassion were not weaknesses, they were strengths. Protecting someone vulnerable, showing restraint, and acknowledging another person's dignity were acts that required true courage, perhaps even more than facing a band of hostile men or surviving a harsh desert night. The young Apache girl, noticing the cowboy's distant presence, felt a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She understood that he was no longer a threat, but she did not fully trust strangers easily. Yet she also sensed that his decision to respect her plea was intentional and genuine. In her short life, she had learned to judge people quickly, and she understood that trust was built slowly, sometimes in moments of quiet observation rather than loud words. She kept her eyes on him while helping her group navigate the rough terrain, making sure the children stayed safe, all the while thinking about the man who had surprised her with his unexpected respect. The cowboy spent the afternoon walking near the Apache group, careful to give them space while remaining close enough to intervene if danger appeared. He noticed how skillfully they moved through the desert, using the landscape to their advantage, knowing where to find water, shelter, and safe paths. He realized how much he had underestimated the knowledge and resourcefulness of the people he had once considered others. Each small observation deepened his respect for their way of life, and he began to see that survival was not just about strength or speed, but about intelligence, understanding, and cooperation. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the desert, the cowboy reflected on what he had learned that day. The world could be harsh, yes, but it was also full of opportunities to act with kindness. The Apache girl's plea had reminded him of a simple truth. Every person, no matter how young or small, deserved respect and dignity. He realized that true courage was not only in facing physical danger, but in standing up for what was right, even when it was easier to ignore it. The girl, now settling for the evening with her family, glanced in the direction of the cowboy. She saw that he had stayed near, not interfering, not threatening, but simply observing and making sure they were safe. She felt a quiet sense of relief and gratitude, though she did not know how to express it in words. In her mind, she remembered the first moments of fear, the desperate plea that had shaken the silence of the desert, and the calm, unexpected response that had changed her perception of strangers. Night fell, and the desert cooled under a sky full of stars. The cowboy made a small fire at a safe distance, thinking about the lessons of the day and the strange twist of fate that had brought him and the Apache girl together. He understood that he would not forget her plea, nor the feelings it had stirred within him. He felt a sense of humility, knowing that he had been tested in a way he had not anticipated, and that he had chosen to act with honor. The young Apache girl, lying under a simple blanket, thought about the day as well. She thought about the stranger who had surprised her, who had listened instead of taking advantage, who had respected her in a world that often seemed cruel. She felt a quiet hope growing within her, the knowledge that even in a land filled with danger, there were people capable of kindness. And though she did not yet understand him fully, she knew that their encounter would remain in her memory, a reminder of courage, dignity, and the unexpected power of respect. As the night deepened, the cowboy and the young girl slept under the same vast sky, separated by distance but connected through an unspoken understanding. Both had learned something that day, not just about survival in the desert, but about the nature of humanity. The world could be harsh, yes, but moments of compassion could shine brightly, even in the most unlikely places. And in that quiet, starry night, a bond had begun to form, fragile yet enduring, born from a simple plea and a surprising response. The morning light slowly crept over the desert, painting the rocks and sand with gentle gold. The cowboy stirred near his small fire, the memory of the previous day still heavy in his mind. The image of the young Apache girl, her small hands clutching her bundle, her eyes wide with fear yet full of courage, remained with him. He had spent the night thinking about her, about the lessons her plea had taught him. For the first time in years, he felt a pull toward compassion, a desire to act not out of self-interest, but from understanding and respect for another human being. Meanwhile, the young girl had awakened among her family, stretching and rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She felt the morning chill in the desert air, but it did little to diminish the courage she had carried since the day before. Though wary, she remembered the cowboy's calm response, the way he had listened and chosen not to harm her. In her life, such gestures were rare, and the memory of his respect filled her with a mixture of relief and curiosity. Could he truly be trusted, or was this just a temporary pause before danger came again? Her mind could not rest on that question, for survival left little time for doubt. The cowboy mounted his horse slowly, making sure not to disturb the group. He knew that his presence could easily be misunderstood, and he wanted to act carefully. He followed a path that kept him visible but distant, allowing him to keep an eye on the family without intruding on their space. Every movement of the Apache people fascinated him, the way they communicated silently, the way their bodies moved with a practiced ease over the rough desert terrain. Even the smallest gestures carried meaning. He realized that survival was not just about skill or strength, but about cooperation, understanding, and respect for one another and the land they lived on. The young girl noticed the cowboy at a distance. Her initial fear returned, but it was tempered by a growing sense of curiosity. She had seen many strangers in her life, most of whom brought danger or discomfort, but this man seemed different. He did not rush, he did not shout, and he did not try to control them. He simply moved quietly, observing, without causing harm. That subtle difference made all the difference in her young mind. She realized that people could be judged not only by what they said, but also by the way they acted in silence, by the choices they made when no one was forcing them to act one way or another. The cowboy finally slowed and dismounted near a small rocky outcrop, keeping a careful distance. He took off his hat and shaded his eyes as he looked at the girl and her family. In that moment, he realized that the desert was not just a harsh landscape. It was a place that demanded respect, patience, and understanding. He felt a new sense of responsibility. He could not change the world, nor could he protect everyone he met, but he could choose to act honorably in this one moment. And that choice mattered. The young girl watched him for a long while, her curiosity growing. She began to notice small details about him, the way he moved cautiously, the way he avoided stepping too close, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. She realized that he had made a choice, a conscious decision to act differently than others might have. In that decision, she saw strength, but also a kindness that was almost foreign in her experience. Slowly, a sense of trust began to form, fragile but present. She nodded slightly to herself, as if acknowledging the beginning of an understanding between them. The cowboy, sensing her cautious attention, spoke softly, though not too close. "I don't mean any harm," he said. "I just want you to be safe." His voice was steady but gentle, and it carried no hidden threat. The young girl listened carefully, hearing sincerity in every word. She realized that he was not just saying what he thought she wanted to hear, he truly meant it. That realization gave her courage to speak again, though her voice was still quiet. "Thank you," she said, her words simple but meaningful. From that moment, a silent bond began to grow between them. The cowboy and the girl did not need long conversations to understand each other. The desert itself became a witness to their cautious connection, the wind blowing softly, the sun casting warm light on their faces, the stones and cacti surrounding them as if protecting this fragile moment. It was a bond built on respect, trust, and the shared understanding that life was difficult and kindness could be rare. The cowboy realized that he could do more than just observe. He began to offer small gestures of help without intruding. He pointed out safe paths to cross rocky terrain, showed where water could be found, and even assisted with carrying small items when the terrain was particularly rough. Each action was careful and respectful, never overstepping boundaries, but it allowed the girl and her family to see that he was genuinely willing to help. In return, the girl began to share small stories about her life, her tribe, and the challenges they faced daily. She told him how they traveled, what they ate, how they found shelter, and how they protected one another. The cowboy listened intently, learning not only about their survival but also about their deep respect for the land and each other. Through these interactions, the cowboy began to see the world from her perspective. He understood the wisdom in their traditions, the courage it took to navigate a harsh and often hostile environment, and the resilience required to survive. Every story the girl shared deepened his respect and admiration. He realized that the Apache people were not merely surviving. They were thriving in ways that demanded intelligence, bravery, and profound understanding of their surroundings. At the same time, the girl learned from the cowboy as well. She saw that not all outsiders were dangerous, that some people could act with integrity and empathy even in a world that often rewarded selfishness and cruelty. She noticed the careful way he handled his horse, the thoughtful way he approached challenges, and the quiet patience he showed. These observations gave her hope that there could be more balance between the harshness of life and acts of kindness. She began to feel that even in danger, there could be moments of trust and understanding, small but significant, that made survival and life richer. As the day continued, the cowboy and the girl navigated the desert together, carefully maintaining distance while learning about each other's worlds. He showed her how to recognize certain tracks in the sand, pointing out signs of animals or approaching weather. She explained how her people could find water from plants, how to move quietly to avoid unwanted attention, and how to stay connected even in a dangerous landscape. Each teaching moment strengthened their understanding and mutual respect, building a bridge between two very different cultures. Even when they did not speak, their presence together was meaningful. The cowboy's quiet vigilance reassured the girl that she and her family were safe, while the girl's courage and resourcefulness reminded him of the importance of empathy and patience. The desert, often seen as a place of isolation and danger, became a shared space where trust could grow, and humanity could shine through even in the most difficult conditions. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor, the cowboy and the girl paused for a moment near a small, sheltered area. The young girl sat down with the youngest members of her family, making sure they were comfortable, while the cowboy adjusted his pack and checked on his horse. They both reflected quietly on the day's events, the challenges faced, the small victories achieved, and the unexpected bond that had formed. Both understood that trust was fragile, that the world was unpredictable, but that kindness and courage had the power to make a lasting difference. As night fell, the cowboy made a small fire at a safe distance, careful not to intrude but close enough to offer protection if needed. The girl and her family settled nearby, feeling the warmth of the fire and the reassurance of his presence. In the flickering light, a sense of calm descended over the group, a rare peace in the vast and often unforgiving desert. For the first time, both the cowboy and the young girl felt that perhaps, in a world full of danger, there could also be moments of safety, understanding, and connection. The cowboy knew that this day had changed him. He had been forced to confront his own assumptions, to question his instincts, and to recognize that strength was not only physical but moral. He had learned that courage could take many forms, including listening, respecting, and choosing not to act when action could cause harm. The young girl's simple plea had opened his eyes to a different way of being in the world, one that valued empathy, dignity, and the small acts of kindness that could make life bearable even in the harshest conditions. The young girl, too, had been changed. She realized that the world was more complex than she had imagined. Some strangers could indeed be dangerous, but some could also act with honor and compassion. She understood that trust, though fragile, could be built carefully, and that even the smallest moments of connection could have a powerful impact on her life and the lives of those around her. She carried the memory of his calm presence with her as they prepared to move again, knowing that this encounter had left an impression that she would not forget. By the time the stars filled the night sky, both the cowboy and the Apache girl had learned lessons that went far beyond survival. They had discovered the value of respect, the strength in patience, and the power of compassion in a world that often seemed devoid of it. The day had brought danger, uncertainty, and reflection, but also hope, a fragile, glowing hope that even in a desert of harshness, humans could find ways to act with integrity and honor. And so, under the quiet, watchful sky, they rested. Both aware that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more decisions to make, and more dangers to face, but also aware that the connection they had formed, born from respect, courage, and a shared understanding, would guide them in ways that neither could yet fully understand. In the heart of the desert, two very different lives had begun to intersect, teaching lessons of humanity, empathy, and the unexpected power of trust. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The air was crisp and clear, but an unusual tension hung over the landscape. The cowboy stirred awake, stretching and shaking off the lingering stiffness from the previous night. He glanced around, carefully scanning the horizon. The Apache girl and her family had moved slightly ahead, navigating the rocky paths and sandy stretches with practiced ease. He followed at a safe distance, as always, respecting their space but keeping a watchful eye. Something in the air felt different today, and he could not shake the feeling that danger might be closer than it appeared. The young girl noticed it too. Though she had begun to trust the cowboy, she had also learned to read the subtle signs of the desert. The quiet rustle of leaves, the distant clatter of hooves, the sudden absence of birdsong. Her instincts, honed by her upbringing and experiences in a harsh world, told her that something was approaching. She instinctively drew the younger children closer, speaking softly to reassure them even as her own heart raced. The cowboy, riding behind, sensed her unease and slowed, understanding that she had spotted something he might not yet see. The tension built slowly, like a shadow stretching across the sand. Suddenly, a group of riders appeared in the distance, kicking up dust as they approached. The cowboy immediately recognized them as outsiders, men who seemed rough and impatient, riding with little care for caution. They were not part of the Apache group, nor did they appear to be travelers like himself. Their intent was unclear, but the cowboy's instincts told him they could bring trouble. He reined in his horse and observed carefully, considering how to protect the young girl and her family without causing unnecessary panic. The young girl's eyes widened with fear as she saw the new riders. She knew instantly that they could be dangerous. Stories from her elders had taught her to be wary of strangers, especially those who rode aggressively and seemed unconcerned with the lives of others. She glanced at the cowboy, silently questioning what he would do. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, the desert holding its breath as the two sides prepared to face each other in a situation that could turn dangerous in an instant. The cowboy's mind worked quickly. He realized that he had a choice. He could stay hidden and allow the Apache family to face potential danger alone, or he could step forward, using his experience and presence to protect them. He chose the latter. Carefully, he rode closer to the family, signaling with a subtle gesture that they should remain calm but ready to move. The young girl understood immediately and began guiding the younger children behind the rocks and low shrubs, creating small barriers and safe spots where they could hide if necessary. The outsiders rode closer, shouting and brandishing their weapons. Their voices were loud and commanding, and their intent seemed clear. They were looking to intimidate, to take what they wanted, or simply to assert control. The cowboy could see the fear in the Apache girl's eyes, the same fear that had driven her to plead with him days before. He knew that in moments like this, courage was required, not only from him but from everyone involved. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and prepared to act. The young girl, despite her fear, did not freeze. She remembered the lessons of her people: patience, observation, and careful planning. She whispered instructions to the younger children, telling them to stay quiet, to follow her movements, and to watch for signals. Her mind worked quickly, analyzing the outsiders' approach, noting their positions, their expressions, and the direction of their movements. She realized that panic would only make the situation worse, and she focused on remaining calm, even as her heart pounded in her chest. The cowboy dismounted, carefully placing his horse behind a natural ridge where it would be out of sight. He kept his voice low and steady as he spoke to the young girl, explaining what they needed to do to stay safe. She listened intently, nodding and understanding every word. Together, they formed a silent plan. The cowboy would position himself where he could intervene if the outsiders threatened the family, while the young girl would lead her siblings to safer ground, using the natural terrain to their advantage. As the outsiders drew closer, the cowboy's presence became a deterrent. They were taken aback by his calm confidence, by the way he stood firmly yet without aggression. They did not fully understand who he was or what his intentions might be, and this uncertainty slowed their advance. The young girl, watching carefully, saw the effect he had on them and felt a spark of hope. She realized that courage, when combined with careful thought and respect for others, could influence even those who seemed most threatening. The first rider approached too closely, shouting and waving a stick, trying to force the Apache family into submission. The cowboy stepped forward, holding his hands in a way that was non-threatening but firm, signaling the rider to stop. "Back off," he said quietly but clearly. The rider hesitated, taken aback by the unexpected authority in the cowboy's voice. He glanced at his companions, who also slowed their advance, unsure of how to proceed. The desert was silent except for the wind and the distant clatter of hooves, a tense pause that seemed to stretch on forever. The young girl took advantage of the moment. She guided the younger children behind a low boulder, whispering encouragement and instructing them to stay still. Her voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority, the authority of someone who had learned to lead even in moments of fear. She felt the cowboy's steady presence nearby, giving her confidence that they could manage this situation together. Their trust in each other had grown from a fragile understanding into a quiet partnership, each relying on the other's strengths. The outsiders, realizing that their initial intimidation had failed, began to maneuver around the ridge, attempting to flank the group. The cowboy anticipated this move and shifted his position, keeping them in sight while blocking their path to the children. His experience in the desert, his knowledge of terrain, and his careful planning gave him an advantage that the outsiders did not expect. The young girl, watching his movements, learned from his example, seeing how patience and strategy could turn fear into control. Tension built as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Dust swirled around the rocks, and the voices of the outsiders grew louder. The cowboy and the girl exchanged a brief glance, each acknowledging the courage and quick thinking of the other. Together, they created a small barrier of protection, using natural features and careful positioning to ensure that the family remained out of harm's way. The young girl marveled at the way he moved. His calm, deliberate actions contrasted sharply with the chaos of the outsiders, and she felt a sense of relief mixed with awe. Finally, The outsiders, realizing that the situation was not going in their favor, began to retreat slowly. The cowboy did not chase them, knowing that unnecessary aggression could escalate the situation. He maintained his position until they disappeared from view, making sure the family was safe before relaxing slightly. The young girl, still tense but relieved, gathered the children and her family together. She looked at the cowboy with gratitude, understanding that his presence had made the difference between safety and potential harm. After the danger passed, the cowboy and the young girl sat together for a moment, catching their breath. Neither spoke much, but the silence was filled with understanding. They had faced a real threat, yet through calm thinking, courage, and mutual trust, they had protected the vulnerable. The young girl realized that she could rely on him not only for guidance, but also as someone who respected her people, her traditions, and her choices. The cowboy, in turn, understood that his own sense of morality and compassion had been tested and proven, reinforcing the lessons he had learned from her courage and wisdom. As the sun began to set, casting warm hues across the desert, the cowboy and the young girl reflected quietly on the day's events. The desert, harsh and unpredictable as always, had tested them both in unexpected ways. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and potential danger, yet they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more connected than ever. Each had learned from the other, the cowboy about the courage, intelligence, and resilience of the Apache people, and the young girl about the possibility of kindness, integrity, and protection even from outsiders. Night fell, and the desert cooled under a sky full of stars. The family settled for the evening, and the cowboy made a small fire nearby, careful to maintain respect and distance. The young girl sat close to her family, glancing occasionally at him. She knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more dangers, and more decisions to make. But she also knew that they had learned something important, that trust, courage, and careful planning could overcome even the most threatening situations. The cowboy, watching over them, felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had protected the family without aggression, guided the young girl in subtle ways, and reinforced the lessons he had begun to understand about respect and empathy. He knew that the desert would continue to be a place of danger, but he also knew that small acts of courage and compassion could change the course of events, saving lives and strengthening bonds. And so, under the quiet, watchful stars, they rested. Both the cowboy and the Apache girl understood that life on the frontier was unpredictable, but their connection had grown stronger. They had faced external threats together and had discovered the power of cooperation, courage, and mutual respect. The lessons of the day would stay with them, shaping their choices and strengthening their bond as they continued their journey through a world full of challenges, uncertainty, and unexpected hope. The desert morning arrived quietly, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. The cowboy stirred, feeling the cool air against his face, and looked around at the small group of Apache people who had spent the night nearby. They were beginning to pack their few belongings, moving slowly and carefully, mindful of every step. The young girl was helping the younger children with their blankets and small bundles, her movements steady and deliberate. Despite the challenges of the past days, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from experience, courage, and the knowledge that she had survived danger before. The cowboy watched them from a respectful distance, knowing that his role was not to lead, but to assist when necessary. Over the past days, he had learned more than he could have imagined, from the girl's courage, from her careful planning, and from her family's wisdom about the land. He realized that the lessons he had learned here were not just about survival in the desert. They were lessons about humanity, dignity, and trust. In protecting them and respecting their space, he had discovered a new understanding of what it meant to act with honor. The young girl, noticing him nearby, smiled faintly. She had come to trust him not fully, but enough to know that his intentions were good. She remembered the first day, the moment she had cried out, "Please, don't take my clothes away." The fear and desperation of that moment now felt distant, replaced by a quiet sense of respect and understanding. She had learned that courage could be small and subtle, that trust could grow slowly, and that even strangers could show kindness in unexpected ways. As they moved through the desert, the cowboy occasionally offered guidance, pointing out safe paths and warning of loose rocks or hidden dips. The girl accepted his help with gratitude, understanding that his knowledge could complement her own. Together, they navigated the rough terrain, moving carefully yet efficiently. Each step strengthened the bond between them, a bond built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the recognition of each other's strengths. The day passed with little incident, the desert calm yet unpredictable. The cowboy found himself reflecting on how much he had changed in just a few short days. He had witnessed courage, patience, and wisdom in a child younger than he had expected could teach him such profound lessons. He realized that survival was not only about skill or strength, but also about understanding, empathy, and the choices made in moments of uncertainty. The young girl's plea had not just saved her dignity, it had sparked a transformation in him, reminding him of the humanity that could exist even in the harshest of places. The girl, too, reflected on their journey. She thought about how she had initially feared the cowboy, how she had expected the worst from him, and how he had surprised her with respect and protection. She realized that not all outsiders were the same, that some could act with integrity even when they had every reason to act selfishly. This knowledge gave her hope, not only for herself but for her family and her people. She began to see that courage and kindness could exist together, and that even in a world filled with danger, trust could be built with careful thought and understanding. As the afternoon sun rose higher, the cowboy and the girl came to a small stream, the water clear and cool. The family paused to drink, wash, and rest. The cowboy offered water to the young girl, who accepted it politely. The gesture was simple, but it carried significance, another sign of the respect and care that had grown between them. The girl looked at him, realizing that their shared experiences had created something more than temporary trust. There was a quiet understanding now, a sense that they had learned from each other and had grown stronger together. After a short rest, they continued their journey, moving toward the safety of familiar terrain. The desert stretched endlessly around them, but they were no longer just two separate travelers in this harsh land. They were companions in understanding, partners in navigating challenges, and witnesses to the lessons each had taught the other. The cowboy thought about how the girl's courage had inspired him to act with patience and empathy, and he hoped that his protection had given her a sense of safety and dignity in a world that often overlooked such qualities. As evening approached, the group found a sheltered area where they could camp for the night. The cowboy helped set up a small fire at a safe distance, careful not to intrude, but close enough to offer protection if needed. The young girl arranged blankets and guided the younger children, her movements confident and purposeful. They worked in quiet harmony, the desert around them calm under the soft glow of the setting sun. In this moment, both the cowboy and the girl felt a sense of completion, a recognition that they had faced danger, learned from one another, and emerged stronger. The night settled over the desert, and the sky filled with stars. The cowboy watched the girl and her family, reflecting on the journey they had shared. He realized that the bond they had formed was rare and meaningful. It was not based on words or promises, but on actions, respect, and shared experiences. He thought about how the girl had taught him the value of patience, courage, and empathy, and he felt grateful for the unexpected lessons she had provided. The young girl, lying close to her family, looked up at the stars and thought about the cowboy. She remembered the first moment she had feared him, the plea that had been spoken in desperation, and the calm, respectful response that had followed. She realized that their encounter had changed her, that she had learned something about trust, courage, and human kindness. She felt a quiet sense of gratitude and hope, understanding that even in a harsh world, people could act with integrity and honor. As the night deepened, both the cowboy and the girl drifted into a reflective silence. They knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new dangers, but they also knew that they had grown through their shared experiences. Each had learned from the other, and each carried the lessons forward in their hearts. The cowboy felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to act with patience and respect, while the young girl felt strengthened by the knowledge that courage, empathy, and trust could coexist even in the most difficult circumstances. The next morning, the cowboy prepared to leave, knowing that the Apache family would continue their journey and that his role as a protector and guide had come to an end. The young girl watched him mount his horse, a mix of gratitude and sadness in her eyes. She understood that their paths might diverge, but the bond they had formed would remain in memory and heart. She stepped forward and spoke, her voice steady. Thank you for protecting us, for listening, for understanding." The cowboy smiled faintly, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. "It was my choice," he said. "You were brave, and I learned from you too. Keep trusting your heart and your courage." He rode slowly away, the sun casting his shadow across the desert sand, leaving behind a sense of respect, honor, and shared humanity. The young girl returned to her family, helping them continue along the path towards safety and home. She felt a quiet strength within herself, the lessons of courage, patience, and empathy woven into her spirit. She knew that the world could be unpredictable, but she also knew that she had learned how to face it with dignity and confidence. The memory of the cowboy and the unexpected kindness he had shown would remain with her forever. As the desert stretched endlessly around them, both the cowboy and the young girl carried forward the lessons of their shared experience. Each had faced fear, uncertainty, and potential danger, yet they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the essence of humanity. The girl understood that even the smallest voice could be heard when spoken with courage, and the cowboy realized that true strength often lay in empathy, patience, and respect for others. The day ended with the quiet warmth of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the desert. The cowboy disappeared into the distance, and the Apache girl and her family continued their journey, each step guided by experience, courage, and the knowledge that the world could hold moments of kindness even in the harshest places. They had faced danger together, learned from each other, and discovered that trust and respect could bridge even the widest divides. In the end, the desert was silent once more, the wind whispering through the rocks and cacti. The story of the young girl's plea and the cowboy's unexpected response remained in the hearts of both. It was a tale of courage, trust, and the enduring power of empathy, a reminder that even in a world filled with fear and uncertainty, acts of kindness and understanding could shine brightly, leaving a lasting impact on all who experienced them. The young girl, looking toward the horizon, smiled softly, her heart carrying the memory of the cowboy's calm presence and the lessons he had taught her. She understood that life would continue to challenge her, but she felt ready to face it with strength, wisdom, and courage. And the cowboy, riding under the wide, open sky, carried the memory of her bravery and resilience, a reminder of the humanity that could exist in the most unexpected places.